Sup, sobers? Welcome back to part 2 of the Gilbert Paul Jordan saga. Where did we leave off? Oh yeah, Prince George just tried to have him permanently labeled a DSO, which is a dangerous sexual offender. And they failed. Classic for this Canadian judicial system. But he was freed and able to walk out the door in November of 1976. Now, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's because you missed part 1. Immediately need to go back to part 1, watch part 1, which I can link below, and then come back here, and then you'll find yourself caught back up, and you'll understand what we're talking about here. So I just wanted to re-clarify this point. Also, I am referring to this guy as the GOAT. By no means am I saying this guy was a great person. This guy was the greatest alcoholic to have ever lived, in my opinion. IMO. But the dude, the dude was crazy. And part 1 was pretty nuts. But that was just the precursor to what is about to happen. So I'm just going to go ahead and start getting into it with you guys. As most of you know, especially if you're true crime fans, there's always a pattern of escalation. Either that or there is no history of crime and this person just randomly snapped and murdered their entire family or something. But there seems to be a pretty significant pattern of escalation in most cases that lead up to murder. People just committing petty crimes, moving up to more serious crimes, moving up to more personal crimes where they're actually hurting people and then moving into actually killing people. The same is true for the GOAT. This dude has literally been escalating his crimes for, at this point, 26 years. And the Canadian judicial system continues to say, nah, man, he's good. Send him back out. It literally was quoted, well, he's old enough now that it's not likely that he'll continue his crime spree. What are you guys doing? For real. Canada just operates a little differently. And I mean, Canada seems dope, to be honest. But this situation is terribly frustrating. But you know what? Our boy's back out on the streets. The GOAT's roaming free. He's got free reign to do whatever the hell he wants to do now because he was released from prison. He's not labeled a dangerous sex offender. And that was in November of 1976. Fast forward just a few months, January 18th, 1977. 3 months maybe? And he's arrested for indecent exposure at Cold Lake. I don't know where Cold Lake is, but that's where it happened. Seems like a bad place to indecently expose yourself. I mean, especially if it's cold. I mean, the shrinkage and stuff. That's neither here nor there. Now, you'd think he got arrested for indecent exposure and then was immediately thrown back in jail and they would reconsider their decision that they just made to put him back out on the streets. No, that's not what happened. He was actually released and back out on the streets immediately, probably because he has a good lawyer. And he finds himself in even more serious trouble a month later. February 21st, 1977. Gilbert goes to the Alberta hospital where he goes to the psychiatric ward and is able to convince a young lady that he's a doctor and convinces her to leave with him. So he takes her, he gets her in his car, and then he immediately drives all the way up to a hotel in Edmonton, where he proceeds to beat and grape this young lady. He did this for 3 days. They literally lived in this hotel for 3 days, living on nothing but vodka, is what it said. And the thing that you have to know about this young lady is that she was abducted from this psychiatric hospital, and he convinced her that he was a doctor because she's a 47-year-old woman, but she has the mental capacity of a small child. So she's severely mentally disabled. And he somehow convinces her to get in this car, drives all the way up to this hotel, beats her, grapes her, continuously assaults her over the course of 3 days, feeding her nothing but vodka, which that's a great diet if you're looking to lose weight, but it's also a terrible diet if you're looking to stay sane and not die. After 3 days, he stole everything that she had, and then he starts driving her back. Not sure why he was just going to drop her back off at the hospital or what. It seems pretty reasonable. He's done with her, just bring her back to where he got her. No harm, no foul. I'm assuming that's what his crazy brain was thinking. But on the way back, he decides, I haven't learned from my past mistakes. I'm going to pull over in this ditch and I'm going to assault this young lady even more than I already have. And guess what? No shit. The cops show up and see this random car pulled over in a ditch, and they decide, well, what's going on here? Because that's what cops do. They pull over and check out this car in the ditch situation. They notice Gilbert in the driver's seat and a young lady in the passenger seat, but she's all beaten up. She's covered in bruises and scratches. She looks like hell, and she's been surviving on nothing but vodka for 3 days, so I'd imagine she looked pretty rough. They notice that this looks like something's up here. What the fuck's going on here? Dude, what are you doing? Now the cops are looking around trying to figure it out. They see a bunch of vodka bottles. They see this poor lady just beaten to shreds. Gilbert tries to tell him, like, no, man, she just fell down some stairs. Classic. That's what everybody says. You'd think they'd come up with something better. Like, I really don't know. But she fell down the stairs. Yeah, sure she did. But no, this girl who honestly has like a very low mental capacity was able to speak up in that moment and say, no, this dude did this to me. So cops, way to go cops, they arrest him, they charge him with assault, they charge him with abduction, and because this poor girl is mentally handicapped, there's special laws that go into play for people who are mentally challenged or are below normal operating levels for IQ, things like that. So it does play a part in his sentencing. But this situation was pretty serious for the GOAT. I mean, he actually was going to face some time here. He was charged with kidnapping, abduction, rape, sexual assault with the feeble-minded, which I didn't know that was like a specific charge until I did this case. It's probably not because she wasn't like a child, but it's obvious that she wasn't a consenting adult because she was of such a like impaired level, multiple impaired levels. And then he was also charged with theft because he stole everything that she had. For the first time, he was actually denied bail. He had to sit in prison for 2 years waiting for his trial. Crazy, I know. He actually spent some serious time behind bars. But don't get too excited. Just wait. In April 1979, the trial began, but because the young lady who was abducted was of such low mental capacity, she was not allowed to testify in the trial. So obviously, without her testimony, there was very little evidence aside from what the police had confiscated and seen with their own eyes the day of the trial. So the GOAT is acquitted of all the charges. Surprise, surprise. WTF, bro. The only charge he actually did have to face was the assault charge because the cops obviously could prove that he had assaulted her based on the way that she looked when they found her. He did get sentenced to 26 months in jail, but he certainly didn't face kidnapping, rape, abduction, sexual assault on a feeble-minded person charges. That to me is just nuts, you guys. This time period, though, of Gilbert going to prison, spending that 2 years in prison, and then having to spend this 26 months in jail was a pretty significant period in his life because this is where he develops the skills of cutting inmates' hair. He becomes a barber. He's a little jail barber, man. Yo, you need a cut? Yo, I'll shade the sides yo hit. So yeah. All right. Good for the GOAT. He's learning some marketable skills. This is going to play a crucial role in the rest of the story. Not only that, but while he was in prison, he actually got an inheritance from a family member. Why? Who would give this dude money? Now, the GOAT doesn't seem like a smart guy, but he did actually invest this money with the help of a broker and actually accumulated enough wealth to be able to start an entirely new life from this inheritance. So I mean, great for him, but unfortunately this didn't really do anything other than fuel his addiction even more. And even after getting sober from being in jail for the 26 months and being crime-free for that long, he still went straight back to the bottle once he got right back out. You know why? Probably because he knew he could do whatever he wanted and get away with it and maybe spend a year or two in jail and then go back to it. Now, I'm not sure how they know this, but maybe it was just from people that knew him. It said that he drank 1.5 liters of vodka per day. 1 liter is 1,000 milliliters. One of those like normal bottles is 750 milliliters. Now, not only did he go back to the bottle, he also went back to his old ways, going down, trying to pick up babes at Skid Row. Why not? I mean, that's what he does. He's going back to his old shenanigans. Fast forward a little bit to 1980. A young lady named Mary Johnson is calling her sister-in-law, and she sounds super troubled. She is very, very troubled. She doesn't sound right at all on the phone. And she says that she thinks somebody wants her dead. But she doesn't give any more details. I don't understand this at all. Why would you call but not give any more details? Like, are you just that scared? Very confusing. Nevertheless, she leaves this call, doesn't want to give any more details about it, but she just says, hey, would you please just make sure and follow up with me with another phone call? So her sister-in-law does that. She follows up with another phone call, but she doesn't get an answer. This is about a week later, and that's because Mary Johnson is actually dead. The exact nature of the meeting, not super sure about it, but somehow she got connected with our boy the goat, and that was the worst thing she could have done with her life. And so she ended up meeting up with him at the Almer Hotel. Probably said that wrong. But they ended up meeting up at this hotel and enjoying a night of fun. And then suddenly she doesn't wake up and is found dead by hotel staff the next morning. When police arrive, they are contacted by her sister-in-law. She tells them everything that had happened with her giving her that crazy phone call and letting her know that somebody wanted her dead. But because the crime scene was pretty much, it didn't look like any foul play. It was a fairly normal situation. And because there was no marks or scratches or anything out of place on her body, they decided that, well, this just seems like a suicide attempt, or at worst, just an accidental overdose. Her sister-in-law insisted, like, no, she called me. She said, like, you need to look into people. Like, there's something up here. It's not just a suicide attempt. But they don't listen to her. They quickly rule the death a suicide, and that's that. Her blood alcohol level, by the way, was 0.34. So just at that level where you'd be considered dead from overdose. So that's probably one of the reasons that they were like, it could be, but it could not be. I don't know. It's too close to tell. We'll start to see this as a recurring theme throughout the rest of the story, but Mary Johnson was a known sex worker, and she was also a known alcoholic. She was also dark-skinned, so the police around that time, they just didn't give a shit. They just didn't care at all. They're like, who gives a shit? It's just a sex worker. It's a colored sex worker. We don't have to care about this. In a way, that is one of the main reasons why these crimes went unsolved and uninvestigated for so long, because the police just didn't have any more reason to care. As sad and as awful as that sounds, I can't even say that without feeling like bad inside, but as bad as that sounds, that's just how it was. They were not interested in finding a deeper reason for this, and they didn't have any evidence to think that there was any deeper reason for this, so it was kind of just brushed off. Roughly a year goes by after this murder. We're finding ourselves in September 1981, and the GOAT has met another young lady, Barbara Ann Paul. Barbara was 27 years old. She was definitely considered to be an alcoholic by people that knew her, and she was known to be a sex worker in the Skid Row area. Man, checking all the boxes. Yet again, these poor cleaning crews go in to clean the room and find a dead body and realize, oh shoot, we gotta... Damn it. But this isn't the same hotel. This is at the Glen Aird Hotel. That's in, I don't know where it's at, but it's at the Glen Aird Hotel. And so police are notified. They show up. There's no signs that there was any other person even in the room with her. So the death is ruled unnatural, accidental, overdose. Lame. At this point, the GOAT is over having to find a hotel room, pay for it, bring a girl there, have people at the hotel always finding these bodies. Just too risky. So he's like, I need to find a better place to be able to take these girls back. That's just not so much work. In comes the barbershop. Slokin Barbershop in eastern downtown Vancouver. In a pretty rough part of town. Not really the best looking barbershop. Probably very similar to the personality of Gilbert, just a little rough around the edges and a little bit shady. But this barbershop is going to provide the perfect place for him to lure his victims back to. Remember that inheritance that he got when he was in jail for a while? Yeah, well, he invested it, made a lot of money, and then he was able to use that money to open this barbershop. Just crazy. But this barbershop endeavor obviously kept him busy, so there's a good chunk of time he's not out there with his normal shenanigans. Fast forward to 1982, got a young lady named Mary Johns. Mary Johns is a 29-year-old woman from the Yukon area. She just recently had fled to the Vancouver area. Her son had died, and she was trying to get a fresh start. She was depressed and looking for just a change of scenery, so she finds herself headed to Vancouver, and that's where she ends up meeting the goat. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as she thinks to be able to get a new fresh start in a new place, and kind of resorts to having to do some sex work and finds herself in the Skid Row area. One night she's out drinking and finds herself following Gilbert back to his barbershop. He's gonna, let's just go back to my barbershop. Let's hang out. Let's drink more. Let's party. You guys already know what's going to happen. The events of that night, nobody really knows exactly how it all went down, but likely the same way that we'll continue to discuss later. When he wakes up the next morning, she's dead. Yep. Surprise, surprise. He had killed her. And the first person he calls, guess who? Yep, his lawyer. Yo, hey man, I know that I've had this happen before, and I know my luck, right? Like, it's just crazy. But there's another dead girl in my barbershop this time. She just drank too much, and I don't know, she just died. It's crazy. What should I do? Lawyer's like, dude, same as last time. Just got to call the police. If you didn't do anything wrong, which you didn't, then, this should be a pretty open and closed case. They're just going to come out and take the body away and ask you some questions, and then they'll move on. So the goat dials the police, calls them up. Yo, hey, I got this dead girl in my barbershop. Not sure what happened. We were just partying last night. She must have just drank too much. It's crazy. The cops are like, okay, what? So they come out, they do some investigating. But up until this point, you have to consider nobody's ever murdered anybody with alcohol before, at least not that we know of, not intentionally. So they have no reason to suspect that this girl was murdered. She is known to be one of the sex workers out on the streets, so they kind of assume that maybe she was just deep into alcoholism. Maybe she just has a real serious addiction problem. But the thing that was a little bit eye-opening, a little bit off on this case, was her blood alcohol level. Her blood alcohol was 0.76. Now, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in part 1, but if you drink to 0.3 or beyond, you're usually unconscious at 0.25 blood alcohol level, but at 0.3, you are definitely not conscious. So for her to be at a 0.76, whoa, how do you even get there? Like, it doesn't even make sense. You just physically can't do it. Not on your own, anyway. So even though this girl was found dead in his barbershop, he was the only person around, and her blood alcohol level was way too high, her death was still ruled accidental. Sometime in 1982, the goat has another love interest. Her name's Maria Elvira. And Maria doesn't quite know what she's getting herself into. But the two of them really hit it off. They're in that honeymoon stage. Gilbert's hiding his drinking from her. Everything seems good, though. She honestly doesn't see any sort of red flags, any sort of signs or symptoms of him being a murderer or an alcoholic. She's just swept off her feet by him, and he is also swept off his feet by her. So they start a relationship, but it's almost like, typical story. Once he secures that deal, he's got that security of her not going anywhere because now they're in a relationship. Now he's got that safety and security. His true colors start coming out. And we know that those colors are not good colors. They're like browns and like puke yellows, blood red, and clear for vodka. Now, these two are in love, but Maria is not from here. She's actually from South America. So she has a visa to be here, but her visa at some point expires and she has to head back to South America. What are they going to do? Shoot, he's like, well, I want to get her back. I want her back here. I need her. I need this woman back. So what do? They get married by proxy. And which I think that just means that they got married in different places. Like they're both married, but she was in South America and he was in Canada. So they got married, which obviously allows her to gain a Canadian citizenship, and she's now allowed to come back to Canada. Great. This is awesome. Good news for Gilbert, not for her. Like I said before, he stopped hiding his alcoholism, and once he stopped hiding it, things just started going downhill. And over the next couple of years, things just would be real bad for Maria. One night in October of 1984, for whatever reason, Gilbert was out prowling around on Skid Row, out at the bars, doing some drinking, hanging out, partying like he always does. And he decides to bring some random woman home from the bar. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, isn't he still with Maria? Yeah, he is still with Maria. So, like, WTF, bro? So he brings this woman home, and when she gets there, the lady he just brought back from the bar is like, who's this bitch? Talking about Maria. And he's just like, oh, it's just the cleaning lady. Don't worry. It's just the cleaning lady. Maria tried to tell this lady to get out of her house. She said, this is my husband. What are you doing in my house? Get out. But then the goat is like, nah, this is just the cleaning lady. Don't listen to her. But Maria's like, no, I'm serious. You need to get out of my house. And this crazy random woman that he brought home decides to grab a knife from their kitchen and starts chasing her around the house. I'm sorry I'm laughing. It's crazy to me. She starts chasing her around the house. Maria goes into the bathroom and locks the door behind her, barely able to escape this lady with a freaking knife in her own house. She waits in the bathroom for a little while, and then when she thinks the coast is clear, she decides she's going to sneak out of the house. So she does that, and she has to walk right past the bedroom where the goat is having sex with this woman who just tried to kill her. Over the next few days, Gilbert pleads and begs, please, I was just drunk. And that's something that Maria says in an interview later in one of the newspapers. She says that he was just truly a sad, depressed, lonely, just awfully sad character. She said that when he was in the depths of his drinking and he was absolutely obliterated, he would be so inconsolable that she would have no other option other than to just kind of leave and just like didn't know how to deal with it. Truly sad. And I can only imagine, because I've been in those places before myself in my own drinking days. I know that depressed feeling. I know those wallowing self-pity parties that you throw. And alcohol is a depressant, lest you forget. So if you drink a lot of it, you're probably going to eventually feel depressed. Even if it's not in the moment while you're drunk, it'll probably be the next day because your brain chemicals are starting to rebalance if they're able to. And that's going to cause some serious mood swings, that's for sure. So it is a depressant. Don't forget that. The goat is like, Maria, please don't leave me. I swear I was just drunk. I don't even remember what happened. I don't even remember any of that. As if that makes it any better. Oh, wait, you don't remember? Oh, okay. Well, then it's fine then. It's fine. But I guess that was the final straw for her. And good for you, Maria, because most people would just keep putting up with that kind of abuse because they're so trapped in this situation. But not her. She said, it's only been 5 months since I came back from South America, but I can't do this anymore, and she divorced him and left and went back to South America. Unfortunately, Maria's triumph is going to be the downfall of multiple other women. So great for Maria, but this just sends the goat into a spiral. He doesn't know how to handle this. He does know how to handle this. He handles it the same way he handles everything. He goes back out, he finds babes on Skid Row, and he starts drinking hard as fuck. We're now in December 1984. The goat meets a young lady. She's 40 years old. Her name's Patricia Thomas. Patricia was also a sex worker. She was also known to have struggles with alcohol. And on top of everything else, she was an indigenous woman from the DT Dot tribe. Not super sure where that's from, but she was a lady of color yet again. And that seems to be right up the goat's alley. That is his type. So not good for her. Now, almost exactly the same story as what happened to Miss Mary Johns. He lures Patricia back to the barbershop. They have some drinks. They're having fun. They're having a good night, doing what adults do. But at some point, she probably got too drunk, and then the goat decides that he's going to go ahead and murder her. Yet again, he's calling the police. The next morning, police arrive to find another dead woman in this barbershop from the same exact thing that just happened not that long ago. Yet again, she's a lady of color. She's known to have drinking issues, and she's a sex worker. So they don't really care that much. They don't really investigate much. They just kind of write it off yet again, even though she had a 0.51 blood alcohol level. What? Now, Gilbert's ballsy for even just doing this as many times as he's doing it in the barbershop and just acting like nothing's wrong. But he isn't dumb. He knows that he's probably going to look suspicious. So he does take some time off from his normal shenanigans before he resumes his regularly scheduled programming. That resumes in June of 1985, and that's where he meets another lady named Patricia. Strange. Her name's Patricia Andrew. Almost an identical situation to the previous two. Finds her out drinking, out on Skid Row, lures her back to the bar. She ends up dead. The next morning, calls the police. Her blood alcohol is 0.79. Whoa, wowzers. One of the reports that I was reading said that in order to get a blood alcohol level of 0.79, you'd have to drink 40 ounces of hard alcohol, aka like 40 ounces of tequila or vodka, probably vodka, because that's the goat's drink of choice. But you'd have to drink 40 ounces of tequila or vodka or whiskey all at once, like in one sitting, just chug it all. And then you would die of a 0.79 blood alcohol level. And yet they still don't think anything's wrong? Like, what is going on with these cops? Now, I think a combination of things starts happening. He's still getting away with things, not having to face the music at all. Nobody is suspecting anything of him. Maybe people are suspicious, but nobody's formally saying anything. Nobody's formally charging him with anything. Nobody's even asking him any questions. So I think his confidence is growing. And then second of all, I think his thirst for blood is growing. He wants to do it more because, well, one of the things that Maria had complained about was because of his intense alcoholism, he had an impotence problem. He wasn't able to get it up very easily, and it caused a lot of problems in their sex life, which is probably why he ended up going out and, doing these things with sex workers because, I don't know, they're paid to do it. They can't judge him or whatever, even though they probably will. But because of this, it's said that he developed this serious insecurity around his sexual performance. It's almost like normal sex just wasn't doing it for him anymore. And a lot of times with these psychosexual sadists, they have this thing inside of them that they're not satisfied sexually unless there's some sort of like masochistic or sadistic piece to the sexual acts. So I see that in this story, at least personally, I think it's how it is. And his love for murder is growing because it's the only way that he's able to kind of get off anymore, satiating that urge, that sick, twisted urge that he has. And it's growing. So just 3 months later, very short amount of time. Before that, he was waiting like a year, 6 months between crimes. We're now only 3 months later. On September 24th, 1985, the goat meets 38-year-old Velma Gibbons. Her and her husband had recently just been separated. She had developed a pretty intense alcohol problem. It was starting to affect their marriage. It was starting to affect her ability to be a mom. And so they separated, and her husband asked her to move out for a little while. So she's living in this hotel, the Balmoral Hotel, and she's just trying to get some space from the situation and sober up and take care of herself and get back to a normal place in her life so she can be there as a mom. Her son's birthday comes up, and she wants to be there in person to give her son a gift on his birthday. Makes sense, right? Any mom would want to do that. So she calls her husband and says, hey, I really want to see our son on his birthday, and I want to give him this gift, but I want to do it in person. I don't want to give it to you and have you give it to him. I promise you that I've been sober, I haven't been drinking, and I promise that if you let me come see him that I'll, behave and everything will be okay. So the husband says, okay, that's fine. I'm totally okay with that. She sounded sober on the phone, so it made him feel a lot more confident about it. And he said, okay, yeah, sure. Come on over and we'll meet up and you can give him this birthday present and we'll hang out and blah, blah, blah. But unfortunately, that never happens. Now, we can only assume that she went out drinking that night, or maybe she bumped into Gilbert and he convinced her to go out drinking even though she was sober, or maybe she was turning tricks and then ended up meeting Gilbert, and then who really knows what convinced her to drop the sober act and to hop off the wagon and to, go down this road again. But especially hours later, because it sounds like she was doing great just hours prior before going to see her son. However, who knows how serious her problem was. Maybe she wasn't really as good as she said she was. Regardless, she'd be found the next morning dead in that Balmoral hotel. She would have died from alcohol overdose. At least that's what the goat wants you to think. The goat is up to 7 victims at this point, at least that we know about. After the death of Patricia, the goat actually waited over a year to go back out and perform his next crime because, well, the heat is heating up, man. I don't want people getting too suspicious. So he waits a whole year. Now, the goat's smart. He's like, if any more dead girls show up in my shop, like, the cops aren't going to believe me anymore, so I probably have to get back to my old method, which is going back to the hotel. The hotel, holiday. Now, when it comes to most serial killers, they always get sloppy. They get confident, they get cocky, they get sloppy, and they start doing things that they don't normally do, which ends up leading to their arrest and them being discovered. The goat is no exception. He starts getting sloppy, and it starts with this girl, Veronica Harry. After going on a bender, hanging out all night, The goat invites Veronica back to the hotel, the Clifton Hotel, and unfortunately she meets the same demise that the previous, 7 women have met as well. The difference, however, with this story versus the other ones is that once she's reported the next morning by Gilbert, as per usual, the cops believe his story that they were just hanging out. She just must have overdosed and drank herself to death. He has no idea what happened. And for whatever reason, they believe him. But during the funeral, all the friends and family members of Veronica, when they saw the open casket, were seeing that she had bruises and scratches and scrapes and marks all over her body. Not something that you'd expect from somebody who just overdosed accidentally on alcohol. Unless they got run over by a car before overdosing on alcohol or something, I don't know. But it just seemed like there was some sort of foul play. Something was up. Something's not right. Okay, so what? She had cuts and bruises all over her. No, the family members, the friends, they started raising hell, man. They're like, something's not right here. They were pushing the cops to do more of an investigation, saying something's up. You guys should need to check this out. What's with all the marks on her? But just because of her social standing and just kind of the nature of the situation, the cops, like I had mentioned before, just didn't really pay attention to anybody and didn't really care. So they didn't reopen anything. With nothing happening from this situation and this incident either, the goat is just going to go right back out to it. And that's exactly what happens. However, like I mentioned before, he's starting to slip up. Things are starting to unravel for him. He's starting to get a little bit too cocky, in my opinion. So it's October 12th, 1987. The goat meets Vanessa Buckner. She's 27 years old. She's a sex worker. She's known to have addiction problems, but she's not known to be a drinker. Nobody that knows her to be addicted to alcohol. She's addicted to other drugs. It's not quite sure which ones, likely heroin. Regardless, she's not a drinker. Like all the other women before her, she meets the goat out on the Skid Row, the Babe Hunt. And the two of them start drinking, hanging out, partying, the huge. They end up going back to the Niagara Hotel. And once they're at the Niagara Hotel, Gilbert's drinking with her, but he keeps having to go out and get more alcohol. They keep running out of alcohol, and she keeps falling asleep on him. So he has to go out and get more because he runs out. He comes back, but by the time he comes back, she's, passed out. He has to wake her up, and they have to kind of start the process all over again. And then at some point, obviously she becomes unconscious. Now, I'm sure you guys have been wondering, how on earth is he murdering all these women with alcohol? It doesn't quite make any sense. How can he just force them to drink themselves to death? He's not so much forcing them to drink themselves to death, but what he's doing is he's highly encouraging them or offering to pay them more if they do take another shot or if they do drink more. And obviously with his intentions, he knows that he's just going to get all that money back at the end of the night anyways, because he's just going to rob them after they die. But he decides that he's just going to keep paying them more. He's going to keep egging them on to drink more until they finally go unconscious. Once they go unconscious, then he physically dumps alcohol down their throats while they're unconscious, forces them to drink it while they're out cold. I don't even know how you do this. I don't know physically if that's even, it must be possible because he was doing it, but I just can't even understand how you would do that. I really don't. But he would force these women to drink even more alcohol once they're already blacked out, passed out, and unconscious, to the point where they would just be flooded with alcohol. They would be flooded with this poison, and it eventually would shut down their body and they'd die from overdose. But because he had to keep going back out for more booze, and he kept having to do this over and over and over, trying to get her to the point where she'd be unconscious long enough for him to be able to dump more alcohol down her throat and actually finish what he was doing, he ended up having to give her more alcohol than he's ever given anybody before. It was said that he was giving her so much that she actually had black bile coming out of her nose. She was that overdosed on alcohol that her body was just shutting down and fluids were just coming out. Absolutely super, super sad and super scary to think about. Once he knew that she was dead, he finally was ready to go ahead and get the hell out of there. Get the hell out of Dodge. He went back to his own hotel room. It was at a different hotel. Called his lawyer, who then told him, hey, you should definitely call the cops again. So he calls the police, but he does this anonymously from the hotel room. He doesn't want anybody to know who he was, which is kind of weird. And it's also kind of weird because he says something along the lines of, hey, you guys might want to go check out this room at the Niagara Hotel. I'm really concerned about the person there. And then they go end up checking out the hotel and, of course, find a dead body from a girl who's overdosed. When they do her blood alcohol level with the toxicology report, her blood alcohol was 0.91. Whoa. So when the cops realize she has a .91 BAC, they're like, this is way too high. This is just inhumanely high. There's no way a human being could even get this high. That's almost one, like 1.00 on the scale, aka like her entire blood would be consumed by alcohol. That is insane. Like 91% blood alcohol level. Like, what the fuck? But anyways, the cops know, like, this isn't normal. There's something wrong here. Something's up. And likely the guy, this anonymous phone call guy, he probably had something to do with it. Of course. Finally, these cops are using their noggins. Way to go, guys. Now, I didn't know if they could trace calls or not back in 1987, but apparently they can. Or could. Whatever. But they traced this phone call back to the Marble Arch Hotel. And guess who happened to be the name of that person in that room at that hotel? You guessed it. Our boy, the GOAT. This is what finally gets the GOAT on the police's radar more than anything else. They're finally more suspicious of him than ever. They just have no way of proving anything. They're just kind of stuck in the middle at this point. Luckily for them, not so much for young lady Edna Shade, but the police are continuing to monitor the GOAT. They're continuing to keep tabs on him. They actually apply to get an order for like 24-hour surveillance to be placed on him, which obviously is a bureaucratic process that takes some time. And in that time period, we're going up to November 8th of 1987, so not very, like, what, another month? Now, the difference with her is that she actually did not have any alcohol issues. She did not perform sex work. She was not anywhere remotely in the ballpark of Gilbert's normal MO for a victim. And his victim selection, you know, to be fair, was honestly, for his own motives, a really good choice, because it seemed like people just didn't care about the sex workers that were going missing. They're like, whatever. It was just somebody who already had problems. It was bound to take their life anyways at some point. So he kind of he picked up on that. Like, people are going to look into me less if the people who are dying are not as cared about. But this Edna Shade lady, she actually is not like the others. She's different. She's actually, the only association she has to Skid Row is she actually goes down and she helps people re-enroll into school and tries to help them get off of Skid Row and get back into, you know, having a normal life again. She sounds like she was a really, really nice lady. So I really am not sure exactly what happened in order for her to end up in the company of the GOAT and end up being his 10th victim. But the two of them go back to the Beacon Hotel, and obviously same story as before. They drink, she ends up going unconscious, and then he ends up forcing alcohol down her throat to the point where she ends up dying. Obviously, she's not a drinker, so it doesn't take as much for somebody who's not a drinker to be overloaded by alcohol. And if you're a drinker, you've ever used alcohol before, then you know that there is a tolerance to it. And so people who don't drink a lot don't really have a tolerance, and they're more susceptible to things like this. So her blood alcohol was only a 0.12, but she was pronounced dead from overdose from alcohol. However, they had some more reliable evidence at this point. The cops search the scene, and they actually find some fingerprints from Gilbert Paul Jordan at the crime scene. Now, this gives them some substantial evidence to go off of. They can't necessarily prove that he had anything to do with the murder because they don't have any evidence of that, but they do have evidence that he was there, and he wasn't at the scene when police end up finding this body the next morning. Now, once they find these prints, that kind of speeds up the process, and they get the go-ahead to start a 24-hour surveillance on the GOAT. And that's what they do. They start surveilling him. He's still up to his normal activities. He's none the wiser. He thinks he's just getting away with all these murders. He thinks he's good. He doesn't have any care in the world. Business as usual for the GOAT. As per expected, the GOAT is insatiable at this point. His confidence is at an all-time high. I would almost say he's cocky at this point. It's not even 12 days later that he finds himself another victim. Young lady's name is Rosemary Wilson. He takes her back to a place that we're already familiar with, to the Balmoral Hotel, and this is a place he's been. He's murdered women there before. There have been dead women who have been found there before, so I don't know. He's just absolutely being completely careless, if you ask me, at this point. But since the police have 24-hour surveillance on him, they are in the hotel room right next door to the one that he's in with Rosemary. I'm not sure, like, how much they could actually hear or surveil from the next door room. What I was reading basically sounds like they were holding up cups to the wall and just like listening to like what they were saying and recording it. And this was the first time that they get an idea of exactly how he was convincing these women and forcing them essentially to drink more and hit this place where they end up going unconscious. So the police are listening in next door, but they're under strict orders not to intervene unless someone is in dire need, because they don't want to blow their cover and blow this investigation. They want to be able to get solid evidence to put this dude behind bars. So they hear the room go quiet. They decide they're going to start packing up their equipment. And then they're leaving the hotel room when they're in the hallway and they hear this terribly shocking, piercing scream come from Rosemary in that hotel room. Now, they're not sure if Gilbert's in there or not, but they sense that there's someone in serious danger. So they bust in, they go in there, find Rosemary. She clearly was in bad shape. And so the cops immediately rushed her to a hospital. They ask her some questions and try to gather as much information as they can grab from her. And really the only thing that she can remember is that he was forcing her to chug this giant bottle of vodka. And then she just remembers going unconscious and nothing after that. So the cops definitely saved this young woman's life. Gilbert was already gone out of the hotel room, so they weren't able to do anything at that point. But it did give them more solid evidence as to how he was committing these murders, how he's going about doing this stuff. And they were also watching him prowl around on Skid Row earlier in the night, looking for victims, essentially, when he ended up stumbling across Rosemary. And then the two hit it off. He probably lied to her, told her he was something he wasn't. And then she ends up almost dying. Now, this happens 3 more times before police are actually able to have something serious happen where they actually bust in and are able to catch him in the act. The final woman, they actually bust into the hotel room and they actually catch him dumping alcohol down this unconscious woman's throat. They immediately, obviously arrest him. They rush this woman to the hospital and they are able to save her life. So they were able to save 4 women's lives with this surveillance operation. But if you guys ask me, they could have saved a whole lot more lives had they just put this dude in jail years and years ago. Now, the cops busted in and caught him physically dumping alcohol down this woman's throat, but they still are trying to put together a really firm, solid case so they can charge him with these crimes as well as other crimes they suspect him as being guilty for as well. In order to do this, they place an undercover cop in the transport vehicle with him as he's getting transported to the jail. And this undercover cop just kind of strikes up conversation, is just trying to get him to talk about his crimes. And he's mentioning things like, hey man, did you hear that they've got there's a crazy serial killer they just apprehended that's in here? Yeah, it sounds like he's been killing women with alcohol. Instead of actually fessing up to it, he says, yeah, that's me, but they've got it all wrong. I was taking that bottle out of that girl's mouth. She was trying to chug all of that alcohol, and I was just trying to save her. So here he is playing the hero when he's not. Police not only are trying to bust him for these current charges with what he was doing to this young lady that was unconscious, dumping alcohol down her throat, but the main reason that they were trying to catch him is because he was suspected of being Vanessa Buckner's murderer, and the trial that he is going to face is going to be for Vanessa Buckner's murder. Her family knows that she didn't drink alcohol. Her family knows she had a drug problem, but they know that she was not a drinker and that there's no way that her blood alcohol level could reach a 0.91 by herself. She just doesn't, that's just not her. And with all the new evidence that they have proving that he was at the scene of another incident like this and then catching him red-handed doing something like this, they feel like they have a strong case to be able to put this dude behind bars, at least for the one murder. Unfortunately, all these other murders that were labeled as overdoses or unnatural and accidental deaths, those cases are already kind of closed. And so there's really they can't reopen these cases. There's no way for them to prove that he was actually responsible for any of this. Although if you ask me, I think they could have, but for some reason they just didn't feel like it was possible for them to go back and retry him for all these other cases. But they're going to go hard on this one case for Vanessa Buckner and try and get justice, at least for her. And so that's what they do. 1 year after Vanessa's murder, the trial begins in October of 1988. Even though they thought they had enough evidence to charge him with first-degree murder, well, that's what they charged him with originally. Because he wasn't admitting to anything and because they didn't have any solid proof that he physically forced this girl to drink this alcohol and die, they had to reduce the charge to manslaughter in order to get a conviction for the case. Absolutely ridiculous to me. I can't believe that he is still able, even though they've caught him red-handed doing this, he's still able to get out of it somehow. So the charges dropped to manslaughter. And throughout the trial, it said that the goat was super calm, but he didn't really show any remorse for the crimes. He showed absolutely zero remorse, and even went as far as to say that, yes, he did provide copious, excessive amounts of alcohol to Vanessa, but he never forced her to drink it, and he certainly never made her get as drunk as she did, so he certainly didn't take any responsibility for the death piece of it. On his sentencing date, the judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison, which for murder, actually 10 murders, that's super duper light. That's nothing, literally nothing. And we'll find that he's not even going to serve the entire 15 years. It's really not that long at all. But the goat was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He's finally off the streets. Justice has finally been served, right? So this is where our story ends. Or so you thought. No. This is not where our story ends. Now, we all know the goat's got a great relationship with his lawyer, and that's because he consistently gets him out of jail or prison anytime he needs him to. And this is true for this time as well. They appeal the conviction. The appeal actually is successful. His appeal isn't completely acquitted. His sentence is lessened to 9 years instead of 15 years. Okay, sure, still in prison. He's getting older, so maybe it doesn't matter. He's a super hard alcoholic. Maybe he'll just die in prison. That would have been great, right? But no. Because of good behavior, he actually only serves 6 years in prison, and then he's released on some sort of chance statutory release. Now, this is called a one chance statutory release. How this works is he basically was able to go out and do his own thing during the day. He had to stay alcohol free. He wasn't allowed to patronize sex workers. And then every night, when he was done doing his normal daily things at a certain time, he had to return to jail to stay in jail at night. I don't know what the fuck this kind of a program is, but I guess it could be good for people who have been rehabilitated, or like if I was in jail and I was like hoping to get some sort of leniency, this would be a good option. But the goat, dude, like, come on. This guy doesn't deserve shit. This is a 3-year program, so he has to do this whole nightly jail thing for 3 years, which sounds like it would suck. I'm sure it did suck, but who cares? It's the goat. Nobody gives a shit. This guy's awful. He deserves it. But he only lasts 2 years, and then on August 4th, 1996, he doesn't return one night for his nightly jailing, which obviously leads to a warrant being filed, a national warrant being filed for his arrest. And then just a few days later, he actually goes in and turns himself in. Says, hey, sorry guys, like I had some things come up and I just wasn't able to come back to jail. I'm here now. So they have him do a urinary analysis, UA, a pee test. They have him pee in a cup. And since he passed the UA, he didn't have any alcohol. He wasn't under the influence of drugs. They believed his story and they dropped the charges, and he was not... This is ridiculous. I don't even know what to say about this. Like, literally, you guys are just letting this guy off so easy. Because of these charges not being, this should have completely wiped him out of that program. But because it didn't wipe him out of that program, he actually was able to be released in November of 1977, and he opened a new barbershop. Yay! Surprise, surprise. Just getting back to his old ways. He doesn't have any other skills besides getting wasted and cutting hair, so it makes sense. Now, our boy is 66 years old at this point, being released from prison. He's out on the streets. He's got a new barbershop, and he's going back to his old ways. But how? Like, he's 66. How is he going to get some female to follow him back anywhere? Well, he does. In the summer of 1998, which is just a few months, like 6 months later, he invites a woman back to his apartment. It's reported, she actually reported him to the police after this all happened, but it says that he kidnaps her and physically assaults her. He won't let her leave. And so finally, when she's free, she goes to the police and tries to turn him in. But because she's an addict and she's got all these signs of like kind of schizo signs, they just don't believe her story. They don't believe anything that she's saying, and they're like, nah, it's good. We're fine. Sorry, though. You're crazy. Stop doing drugs. Like, really, guys? Like, you don't know that this guy has a criminal background that is exactly the same behavior? Like, to me, the police in this entire story, which must have been lots of different cops over, 50 years, they all shit the bed. But they didn't believe her story. They didn't do anything about it. The goat got off, nothing happened. 2 years go by. Maybe he was scared straight. Maybe he's like, I just can't do it like I used to. So 2 years is how long it takes for him to realize, like, nah, I still want to do this. And so he's actually caught administering alcohol to another woman, and she is also assaulted by him, and she reports him for it. Now, similar to all the other cases, how are you going to prove that this guy was forcing you to drink alcohol? Also, another woman who doesn't have necessarily the best social reputation, so nobody's believing her or trusting her story, or just doesn't care enough because, well, she's not privileged in whatever way. Really dumb stuff. But the charges are stayed, like I mentioned in part 1. They don't have enough evidence, so the charges are stayed in order for them to gather more evidence and then hopefully put together a better case so they can actually try him for the charges. But nothing ever happens, and after 4 months, they let him go. Now, that was in June of 2000. Now, this dude has been going at it hard for 50 years. This is absolutely bonkers to me. Around this time, there's a play that comes out. This play is centered entirely around Gilbert and all of his crimes and how he goes about his murders, and it's called Unnatural and Accidental Women. And it's a very interesting play. It's like, it's basically just chronicling his whole life and serial killer career. So this obviously gets him a lot of media attention, unwanted media attention. He does not like this. People are now like, what the hell? And this dude's free. He lives on the streets. He's literally living amongst us. Like, no, this is crazy. But I'm sure Gilbert does not like this. So he thinks, well, what's the best way for me to figure out this situation? Like, I've already gone through a name change before because my reputation was getting too hot. Maybe I can just go do another name change. So he goes to the name change office. And in order to get the name change back then, you didn't have to do fingerprints or any other sort of identification stuff. You could just change your name and you just could do it, I guess. But around this time, he is trying to change his name to Paul Pierce. It's a good name. I like it. I love that he keeps his first name, though. He's like, I don't want to work on trying to learn a new first name. I don't want to respond to something different. So I'm going to be Paul Pierce. Because of Gilbert's recent name change that he had just done to Gilbert Paul Jordan, and because of who he is and what they know about him at this point, the law actually changes, and he is not grandfathered into that law. So the law actually now requires fingerprints to be taken when you change your name. So he's not able to change his name, unfortunately. Well, unfortunately for him anyways. But around the same time period, he's trying to kind of get the heat off of his back with this whole media coverage and this play that just came out and kind of outed him. So he actually agrees to do his first ever face-to-face interview with a guy named Jim Beatty. And I don't know who Jim Beatty is with, but he does an extensive interview with Jim Beatty and kind of explains his side of things and kind of just blames everything on the alcohol, saying, you know, the alcohol made me do it. I was a different person when I was drunk. And it's like, okay, well, if you know that, then you should probably stop drinking alcohol, bro. At least that's what I did. Some of the details of this Jim Beatty interview were pretty interesting. He says that he came into the interview and was already bragging about like having 16 shots of vodka, and this was an interview sometime mid-morning. Like, what? Also, why are you bragging about that? That's not actually cool at all, like even a little bit. I got a real serious alcohol problem, and I just want to brag about it real quick. So not only does he brag about being super wasted, but then he's like, hey, the newspaper that you work for is paying for everything, right? Let me order the most expensive vodka shot that you got here. And so he proceeds to order not only multiple beers, but the most expensive vodka they have, and has multiple shots of that. But essentially, the gist of his interview was just basically scapegoating alcohol for the entirety of what happened. And even more than that, he would basically just trash talk his victims. Like, they were all addicts anyways. They got what they had coming. They literally they were going to die eventually from their addiction. Like, how senseless can you be, dude? You literally murdered these chicks and then you're going to trash talk them in an interview. But we already know this guy is a real piece of shit. So do we expect anything more? No, we don't. And then at the end of the interview, Jim Beatty actually asks him, like, so what is your plan moving forward? And he literally says, well, I'm going to either plan to open up a barber shop or probably just drink myself to death, which is, he actually does both. Kind of. Now, for the first time during our story here, this is where I actually got a little bit of a chuckle and was really happy with the judicial system, because he was on record drinking with Jim Beatty. Jim Beatty records the whole thing, and he also has it all written down in this newspaper about his experience. So they arrest the goat because terms of his parole being released is that he can't drink alcohol or what am I trying to say? Patronize sex workers. So they arrest him. He's put in jail for 15 months for this, and then he's put on probation for another 3 years, which will hopefully help him not be drinking and hopefully help him fly straight. Now, keep in mind, the dude is like 70 at this point. He's 70 and still raising as much hell as he possibly can. Now, not even a year goes by. The goat's back out. He's out drinking with some woman. She finds out who he is. She reports him. He's arrested. Yeah. Now, even though he was sentenced to 15 months, he only serves a year in jail for this crime. And he's back out on the streets on probation, not supposed to be drinking or talking to chicks like this. Now, I love that they take all these like drinking while not supposed to be drinking on parole or probation things way more serious than any of the murders that he actually committed. But because he was caught drinking and he wasn't supposed to be, he's now put on probation, or he's now put in jail for another year and a half. He's then released in 2004. Dude's 72 years old at this point. And the first thing he does is he's like, I'm getting the hell out of Dodge. I'm driving 900 miles to Swift Current, Saskatchewan, which is dope. I mean, sounds kind of like a dope place to be at, Swift Current. Hell yeah. He doesn't have anywhere to live, doesn't have anywhere to go or stay, so he finds a hotel. This place is called the York Hotel. He actually bumps into a woman who lives at this hotel, which, like, who lives at a hotel? Is that a thing? People live at hotels? Well, anyways, this chick lives at this York Hotel, and they ended up hanging out, drinking at that hotel. She lives far away from where this Eastside Vancouver stuff all happened, so she probably doesn't even know who this guy is. No idea. Now, thankfully for this young lady, she had a serious alcohol problem, which means she probably had a pretty high tolerance. And so she actually made it through the night with the goat, but she was hospitalized the next morning because she was in such bad shape from alcohol poisoning. Immediately after that, though, the goat fled from there and went to Winnipeg. And that actually breached his probation. He's not allowed to leave the area. He's got to stay within a certain area. And so that's a huge, huge no-no. Shouldn't have done that. Since he breached his probation and didn't show up for some sort of court date or something like that, they actually set out another nationwide warrant, and they're looking for him, manhunt, trying to get this dude arrested and brought back. And they actually end up finding him, oh, guess where? At the Winnipeg Hotel. And he's arrested and brought back, and obviously has to face charges for violating terms of his probation. And it said over the course of the next 2 years, he's basically in and out of jail because of probation violations. He gets out, violates his probation, sent right back. That occurs for 2 years. Finally, in July of 2006, the goat was in jail for probation violation stuff and passed away at the ripe old age of 74 from cirrhosis of the liver. I thought he would have died way sooner from cirrhosis, like way sooner. So that's actually crazy to me that his body was able to withstand 74 years of punishment. Well, I guess minus 13. So 61 years of punishment. That's crazy, dude. Crazy, dude. But it's important to remember that he was able to live until 74, being the biggest piece of shit ever. When his victims, a lot of them, some of them didn't make it to 30. Some of them were, 40s, 50s. No, none of his victims made it as long as he did. And so it's sad, and my heart goes out to the victims and the families. I know this is an older case, so they're all probably a lot older, but still just super sad, especially because they probably all had this feeling like this just isn't right. Something's not right here, but they never really got to see justice ever. Even Vanessa Buckner's family, she never truly saw justice. I mean, he spent a total of 6 years in prison for murdering a girl. That's absolutely insane. He should never have been released. He should never have been released in the first place. He should have been labeled a dangerous sex offender and locked away for the rest of his life, and then given the ability to go to treatment and seek treatment for his alcoholism as well as psychological treatment, because he obviously had something wrong upstairs. The one thing I do want to point out that we probably have forgotten through all of this is that the GOAT, Gilbert Paul Jordan, he also was a victim. He was a victim to addiction. He was a victim to his alcoholism, his psychiatric issues. And I feel like a lot of people don't realize that they may be suffering with some sort of psychological issue, and then they turn to self-medicating with a substance. Drugs, alcohol, sex, eating, just it could be anything. But these maladaptive behaviors are something that you turn to in order to cope with this psychological, either, psychological deformity that you have, or a psychological just something you can't quite figure out or put your finger on. And sometimes it really does take the mental clarity of being sober to truly figure out and explore your own mental health and figure out what's going on upstairs. Why am I self-medicating so often? Why do I feel the need to constantly drown my sorrows or my happy times with drugs and alcohol. It's not necessary. And if you find yourself exhibiting signs of addiction, or if you are needing help yourself, feel free to reach out to me here. I've got a link tree in my bio. You can always message me on Instagram, and I'm always happy to help because sobriety has completely changed my life. I found out that I am bipolar, bipolar 2, which means I'm actually more depressed, and then I spend shorter periods in my manic stages. But I found out that I was bipolar, which was a huge discovery for me, and it also allowed me to understand why I was abusing alcohol so much. It made me realize that I'm not just broken and hopelessly addicted. I was trying to soothe this itch that I had, and I couldn't soothe it with anything except for alcohol for the longest period. But that's not a sustainable coping mechanism, and it's not a sustainable way to take care of your mental health. So I'll get off my high horse now, but I just wanted to point that out because Gilbert truly was a victim. And if it weren't for the fact that he was a victim to his own disease and his own addictions, these 10 women might be alive today. But I know this was a long story, you guys. Thanks for sticking it out for parts 1 and 2. If you didn't catch part 1, well, I don't know how you made it here, but you should go watch part 1. I also am going to upload this on my Spotify. I'm going to start it's already started. I have a Spotify podcast up. It's called Sobering Stories. So if you want to follow the Spotify version, you can do that as well. If you don't want to do it on YouTube and you just want to listen to the audio, but feel free to follow it on there. And then if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. I'm trying to grow this thing. I'm trying to monetize, and I'm trying to bring you guys better stories. And that all starts with you guys helping me to be able to make this an actual revenue stream. So it does help me if you subscribe. So please subscribe. But I'm going to go ahead and shut her down and say thank you guys again for listening to the saga, the GOAT of alcoholism story, Gilbert Paul Jordan. And I will catch you guys next Thursday for another story. Later, sobers.